Hello and welcome to the Doctors Who podcast. My name is Chris, and today I will be doing a review of Time for Yesterday by A.C. Crispin. Now, in my last review, I covered Yesterday's Sun, also by A.C. Crispin. So this is part 2 of a 2-novel series. And Yesterday's Sun tells the story about how Spock fathered a son 5,000 years in the past. Ultimately, the Guardian of Forever comes into play. Spock's son decides to stay in the past. The timeline moves on. That first book took place in the original 5-year mission. This one, however, takes place shortly before the events of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. So we have Kirk, grudgingly behind his desk. We have McCoy off doing Lord knows what. Spock is teaching at the academy. All these pieces are coming into play. The pieces are being set for a very short lead-in to the Wrath of Khan. This is interesting because most of the book doesn't actually take place on the Enterprise or even in the 23rd century? 23rd century. A lot of this takes place 5,000 years in the past on a planet called Sarpeidon, and I might be pronouncing that wrong. Now, in one of the original series episodes, which I do not remember off the top of my head, you can put it in the comments if you know, Spock and McCoy are transported to the past on this world. Spock reverts to the primal Vulcan impulses of the Vulcans of that time. He and Zara Beth get it on. A son is born. Now, in the present, or in the 23rd century, Sarpeidon is gone. It's been, I think, a supernova or something to that effect. So the planet's no longer there, but there are extensive archaeological records, and so Spock is able to ascertain from those records that his son not only lived, but also became some sort of a ruler to some people, the people of Sarpeidon. So all this is fascinating, but you need some sort of a plot point for Kirk and Spock and McCoy to reconvene and get the Enterprise and go back and use the Guardian of Forever. And that plot point is that the Guardian is malfunctioning, sending off these temporal waves that are turning civilizations, planets, ships, anything that these waves hit, are just aged to dust. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are able to use the Guardian to go back and find Zar, Spock's son, because Zar in the first book was the only person to telepathically communicate with the Guardian of Forever. So that's kind of the setup here. Now, like I said, that really seems like a secondary plot. It almost seems like the MacGuffin to reunite the three of them with Zar, because most of this and the fascinating bits all take place 5,000 years ago. Zar became a ruler of a civilization. There are warring factions all around him. He knows that he is fated to die in the upcoming battle, and in fact, when scanning the Guardian's overview of the past, Spock actually sees Zar die. So, much like Yesterday's Sun, we get sort of this internal monologue or this internal dialogue from Spock that we wouldn't normally get when you're watching the show or watching a movie or things like that. So we see his struggle with seeing his son die. We see his nervousness or his angst, seeing his son that he hasn't seen for how many years. And that is always a fun dynamic to explore because we don't often get a chance to see behind the curtain, right? So I think A.C. Crispin does a great job with this. The way Crispin writes these characters, it is believably them, things they would do, things that they would say. There are occasions, right? So, the book makes out Kirk to be this Earth history buff, knows his way around ancient weapons and things like that, and he picks up Zar's hand and a half sword and like strikes the on guard position. And he's like, surely you don't fence with this. I mean, come on. That is I realize that's a very nitpicky thing to say, but it is something that when I think about this book, that pops into my head because it's just so off key for him to be talking about his knowledge of medieval weaponry in one breath and thinking that you could fence with a bastard sword in the next. So that aside, this is a really good book. It's fun, it's engaging, and looking at the acknowledgments. So he's consulted scientists for information pertaining to black holes and things like that. He has talked to history buffs to make sure that he's depicting ancient warfare and ancient civilizations in a way that would be realistic. So, and this, Zara comes back to the present. He's been wounded in a battle several years back. He was married and lost a wife and a child when the child was born. So he's seen some stuff, and he's basically shut down. He's ready to embrace this prophecy. He's like, yeah, you know what? It's my time to go. But before he goes back, he arranges a marriage of convenience with one of the warring factions, and they figure out that they actually have feelings for each other. And so he's like, okay, well, maybe I do have the will to live. So, McCoy can fix the leg, and Zara can meld with the Guardian, and that with a fixed leg and knowing how the killing blow comes, he's got a chance for survival. There's a spark of hope. It's not just this grim acceptance of what he thinks is going to pass. So there's a lot of emotional things that are conveyed in this book, from how Spock feels to how Zar feels to the different characters. There's a lot of Kirk seeing Spock in this position and thinking, oh shoot, I should talk to Carol, I should introduce myself to David, things like that. And that, I think, it ties into the themes of the novel really well, and knowing that it comes just before Wrath of Khan, it does fit into the larger picture as well. One thing that's always kind of interested me with the Star Trek novels is that they kind of get to flesh out pieces of canon, and they're not probably considered canon, but Crispin gets to flesh out the purpose of the Guardian of Forever, why it was built, what its job is, and who built it, and all of these things that we don't get that insight necessarily on the show, but it's kind of cool to, even if it's unofficial, get some of that background. And then obviously, the last time Zara was on the Enterprise, it was the TOS before the refit, and this is mentioned several times by Kirk and by Zara and things like that. He's like, oh, I miss the red doors, the turbo lift doors that are red, and they keep coming back to that, and it's like, you know what? It made me kind of sit back and think about the change in design aesthetic between the series and the movies, sorry. And, also being there was 10 or 15 years between the two of them, obviously designs are going to be updated. I mean, look at the design of the Enterprise from Discovery. It is still undeniably the Enterprise, but it doesn't look like it existed almost 65, 70 years ago. So I think it's only, to borrow Spock's expression, logical that we're going to see some of these changes. But it's kind of cool to have somebody come in and say, hey, wait, the way this was, I really like this. So that is just a little something that kind of lends some nostalgia, like some nostalgic weight behind it. So Zar does eventually go back, and he does decide to go through with this battle that may take his life, and his new wife is delighted to have him back. McCoy fixed his leg, and she's marveling, and Spock and McCoy are miffed because, Kirk and McCoy are miffed because Spock didn't come to say goodbye to Tsar before he beamed back down to Gateway. But then they find out that Spock actually took the Lurpa and the Anwoon, two weapons we saw in Amok Time when Kirk and Spock were fighting in the arena, and he went back through the Guardian to try to save his son's life. This is an instance, and I think it's even brought up in the book, where it's like that was not a logical course of action, but Spock's like, you know what? You're my son. Family isn't always subject to the same logic. So, it's good. Would I recommend this book? I would. How Spock actually goes back and what he does to help ensure Zar's survival. Not only his survival, but the survival of his people is pretty cool. So if you happen to come across Time for Yesterday, I recommend picking it up. It's helpful if you read Yesterday's Sun before this, but I don't think it's necessary. It'll give you some background on the characters and the relationships and things like that. But I think Time for Yesterday is a better book than Yesterday's Sun. I feel like the writing has improved. I feel like the story is maybe a little better. And I feel like the characters feel more like the characters we've come to know and love. So I read this book probably when I was 14 or 15. And if I'm checking, 1988. First printing was in April of 88. So, yeah, I would 1993 when I was 14, so that's probably about right. And this is one that I lost track of over the years, and I had an opportunity to pick it up, and I jumped at it. And going back in, I'm not sad that I did. I think I probably enjoyed it more now than I did then. So, yes, pick up Time for Yesterday. Pick up Yesterday's Sun. They are not long reads. You can get through them pretty quick. I believe with my whole heart that you will enjoy them. So, again, this is Chris. This is the Doctors Who podcast. Thank you for listening. Please click the like button. Please click the notification bell so you can see when we post more content. And we also invite you to click the subscribe button so you can go along on our journey. Not only do we do these short reviews, we also tackle longer books. We have done Dune. We have done the first Mistborn novel. We've done The Name of the Wind. And we are just about to start The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. So I hope if you see this, you will go check out some of our other content. We think it's a lot of fun. We're not doing this for clicks. We're not doing this for money. We're doing this because we love reading books and we love talking about books, and we have so much fun doing this and sharing our thoughts with you. So please check us out. Leverage the comment section below if you've read this, if I've misstated anything, or if I missed anything. Thank you very much, and as our co-host Brian would say, Allons-y.